Hello, everybody. Welcome to what we call Code with Mark this week. Thank you for coming. I'm quite excited about what we're going to be covering this week. Working with my Python data access library. It does some nice abstractions over joins now. You can actually update data in the database, but there's a bunch of kind of things that I sort of forgot as I was focusing on the trees instead of the woods. Or maybe, is that the opposite way around? I don't know. It's not quite doing all the stuff that I wanted to do. Last week, I said I was going to be integrating with Fast API, and we were going to actually start kind of having API endpoints that updated data in the database. But I'm pushing that after next week. We'll be doing that next Wednesday at 2 p.m. UTC. But this week, I'm going to be writing a test script. That's how I'm going to show you what the library does, in case you haven't been watching the stream before. And then we're going to sort of poke some holes in it, see some bits that haven't been implemented or don't work very well, and then hopefully make them work a little bit better. Because I think I have been writing tests as I go along, so all of the sort of client-side code here has been run, but it's not quite. It's not real world use cases and things. So I haven't been testing edge cases and things like that, which is, I should have been doing that. Those would be better tests if I'd been doing that. But I will give you the quick backstory. I'm just going to share my screen, which means I'm going to have to move this window that I'm looking at right now off to the side. And then I will press the share screen button. So there we go. I've actually got a Stream Deck in front of me that does this for me, but it doesn't seem to be showing me any of the buttons that I need. So just give me one moment while I share my entire screen. So there we go. We've got some code. I'm not going to start off with the code. I'm going to show you something a little bit more accessible, which is the GitHub page. If I can find it. So yeah, I've just been adding YouTube videos to this README. So here's the library that I'm going to be working on. Let me make that a little bit bigger, because I know we've got some people who view this on cell phones. So it's helpful if you can actually read the text that's on the screen. So if you're looking for this, if you actually want to play with the code, or maybe even raise some issues or pull requests, things like that, if you want to have a look at it, the link, although that's still small here, you'll find the link in the description below in either YouTube or LinkedIn, wherever you're watching. So do note, it's an experimental library. It's a different approach to ODMs that hopefully abstracts some of the logical data modeling in MongoDB, physical data modeling in MongoDB from the logical data modeling in your application, so that you keep the ability to change your data in the database, your schema, to make it more optimal as your requirements change, without having to change all of the code that uses that data in your application. So that's really the goal of this project, is to provide a strong mapping layer between MongoDB and your application, whether that's a Fast API application or a Flask application or whatever framework you want to work with. So yeah, I've got some test code in this page, but I'm actually going to write some test code myself today, so we won't go through this too much. And if you're interested in the previous live streams, I've got links to all of those. I just updated this. So for the last few weeks, I've been going, I should put some more links in here. But I've added the streams, because part of this is it's an educational exercise to talk about some intermediate to advanced Python topics, and to talk about data modeling topics within MongoDB, which is really important. And I think sometimes people miss some of the details. If you are interested in more data modeling topics, there's another link in the description below for design patterns in MongoDB, that if you haven't seen that before, I consider that to be the most important web page on the whole of the MongoDB website. We've broken down some common patterns for storing data in MongoDB that maybe aren't completely intuitive, that solve problems like having too big indexes, or your data taking too long to load, or documents getting too big over time, those kinds of things. So do check those out. I'm about to use some of my code to show you one of those patterns called the subset pattern. So without further ado, let's create a file to test the application. So I'm just gonna this is going to be list followers. I could have done this in a Jupyter notebook, actually. That would have been good. Let me make this text just a little bit bigger. I'm going to import docbridge. Now, one of the other things I'm going to import is PyMongo, because one of the aims of this library is not to obscure the MongoDB query language, because I like the MongoDB query language. It's really powerful. I don't want to hide any aspects of it. And although sometimes it seems like a big mess of data structures, when you first start to work with it, I find over time it becomes more and more intuitive to work with and easier and easier to read. So let's import PyMongo. There we go. I have a connection string stored in an environment variable. So let's just get that. MDB URI equals os.environ. MDB URI. Let's just, oops, and I haven't imported OS, so let me fix that. I tend to keep my core Python imports separate from my third-party libraries. Not quite sure. Yeah, so I just haven't used those yet. That's just rough complaining. I'm not going to print out the MDB URI, but what I am going to do is I am going to write a main function. Have I got a? I think I've got a template for that. Oh, there we go. That's nice. I can move that up to there, and now I've got a main function that'll be called. I can connect to my database by excuse me, mine's gone blank. This is what happens when I'm facing a camera. That's the problem. Yeah, actually, while I'm here, I noticed we've got some comments, which is amazing. Thanks, everybody. Oh, we've got Luce. Hello, Luce. Luce is is helping moderate the chat and the comments for us. But that's we've got a lovely audience here, so that's not. It doesn't usually require much except listening to me talk for an extended period of time. Thank you for Luce. I appreciate you taking the hit for that. And hi, Megan. We got Megan here as well. Thanks for joining us, Megan, all the way from Vegas. I think it's early, not too early at the moment, so that's good. So if you're watching, I see Donnie is watching, and I'm glad you're here, Donnie. Thanks for joining us. If you're watching, do let us know. You give us your name, where you're from, in the chat. It's always nice to see that there's actually people watching. I can see a number, but so far you're all just sort of anonymous viewers at the moment. It's always nice to see where people are joining from. So do drop a message in the chat. If you have any questions at any point, or you've noticed me typing a bug, do feel free to drop that into the comments as well. Sometimes that helps streamline things as we're going along. So back to my code. I am going to connect to my database, and so first I need a client equals Mongo client. Woo! Why did I didn't import that directly, so I'll just get that from PyMongo. It's always nice, and then I'm just going to pass it the URI, and then I'm gonna call the ping command. So print client dot send. Oh, I'm not getting it. Do I need to do that to the database? Help me. I haven't done this for a while. Excuse me. Let's see what happens when I call that. I might need to actually, yeah, we'll just see what happens. And I'll switch to the terminal because I'm a bit weird, and this is the way that I use VS Code. It's sort of just as a text, mainly as a text editor with sort of auto completion and stuff. Let me make this a bit bigger. You can see I've been using LazyGit if you're looking at the stuff that it's showing on the screen. Oh, there we go. Python, what did I call that? Any idea? List followers. And now I need to find out where it saved it. This is brilliant. So where did I put this? This is what happens when you write down some notes of what you're going to do, but you don't actually write the code before the live stream just to check that everything works. So let me just move this into the top level. I can't even use my editor today. What's going on? There we go. And it's kept it there. So list. Oh, what is going on? I have moved the wrong thing up. So that goes back into tests. This goes up into the top level. And now we should be able to run it. And if this doesn't work, I'm actually just going to have to bring up the documentation in the first 5 minutes or whatever of this this live stream. Database is not callable. So I'm not quite sure why that's even a database. Because it doesn't like the send command. Client dot get database, send database, start session, watch. Well, this is the reality of being a developer. MongoDB send ping. What does the ping command do? Here we go. Got the MongoDB manual. It's run command. Is it run command? This is amazing. I have done this so many times. I do this in more or less every Python program I write, is to send a ping to the database. So the reason I'm doing this, it's worth explaining, is when you create a Mongo client object, even though you've passed it all the details you need to connect to the database, it doesn't connect to the database at that point. It does nothing. Even when you say db equals client get database, and I've got a database called Y in here, WHY, then it still does nothing. And then in the database, I can get a collection called profiles, db.get profiles. And again, oh, sorry, not get profiles, get collection. That still does nothing. This is, and so sometimes this surprises developers working in a framework or whatever, where they've done this at the start of their program, and their program seems to be running fine. And as soon as they actually run a query, they get an error. And actually, it's worth noting that if I try to then do a find on profiles, so if I go profiles.find, so this should return every document in the profiles collection. That line has also done nothing. So I just assign that to a variable, still doing nothing. The only time that query is run is when you start looping through the contents. So for in all profiles, that is when it actually executes the query. And although it technically returns all of the profiles in the collection, it actually just it returns them in batches of 100 by default. So it'll just send 100 profiles to the client, and then if you loop through all 100 behind the scenes, it secretly goes and gets the next 100 until you've run through all of the profiles in the collection. So just be aware of that. That's kind of a subtlety of MongoDB. There are lots of things that are lazy in MongoDB, and that can catch you out. So the reason I'm trying to send a ping command to my database, and I'm going to actually have to look it up in PyMongo, is because I want to know here that I'm connected to the database. So that's all I'm trying to do, and I've fallen at the first hurdle. So let's PyMongo ping. Yes, it is. Well, maybe I just say send command. Maybe it is a database. It's a database level operation. That's why I can't do it, because I'm trying to do it to the client, not the database. So let's do it to the database. In fact, I can do it after I've got access to before I've got these objects that encapsulate my profiles. I can do it after. Sorry, I've got my collections and things. So db.send ping. Let's print the results. The results are a little bit weird. Whoa, that was actually much more than I expected. And it seems, I was, did I? No, I haven't done a find. Where is my find coming in? I was doing that. So let's take out that. Yeah, it is just going to be one of those days, I'm afraid. Not at my best. Usually I look vaguely competent. Okay, so it returns okay is 1, but it does return that as a float. Don't know if you can see that there. Let me make my text a bit bigger, because I think that's still quite small. So yeah, you do have to check it. Technically, you shouldn't really check against a specific float value. But as long as it's not 0, you should be fine. So to check that that everything's okay with the cluster. I can thank you for validating that you can read my text. That's always good. So I can check that when I get this back, okay is, let's say, greater than 0.5, and that really tells me that my cluster connection's okay. So and that doesn't need to be. So I could do that. I can't do that as an assert because that will disappear. So if not, if it's less than 0.5, then there's a problem. It's going to be a bit of a free-form session today, I think. So I apologize for being a bit stumbling over some of the basics, but we are sort of getting there. So let me just check that works before we move on. Yes, excellent. It didn't raise an exception, so we're all okay. So now I want to have a class that encapsulates a single user profile. So the data here represents a user in a Twitter clone. I've called it Y because that's a pun. Luce likes it. I know she told me last week, but I won't bother to explain this again. But yeah, so I'm going to create a class. Actually, let's first just do a query for one document in the profile collection. So print profiles .find one. At least I know that command. I'm actually going to put a filter on here for one of the documents that I know. I have this user ID field, and it's currently strings. So I have user ID 4, and this has some characteristics that I'm interested in. And I'm going to pretty print this. So I'm going to use the pprint library, not library, but module within core Python. LMNOP from pprint import pprint. This will just make it a bit more readable. So there we go. See, it's nicely indented. We wouldn't get that with the print command. So there's my user ID 4 that I was looking up. Luce is explaining, though, why is it called X? So the clone is called Y. And yeah, it's my kind of joke as well. I like some silly wordplay. So yeah, thank you, Luce. You know, it's much better to have the text on the screen. I think trying to explain that joke, saying the word Y over and over again is just confusing to people. So it's really good to have it written, have it as something I can bring up on screen. Okay, so this is all, it's a fake user profile. Don't worry, this is not real life Twitter profiles. Yeah, so we have this followers sequence. And everything is just like a document. It's just like standard MongoDB documents, which is kind of fine, but it's much nicer in Python to be able to deal with these as objects, as classes. So looking things up as attributes is just, it's not very Pythonic. So the way this library works is that I can define a class. Let's do it at the top level, which is where you'd normally do it. And I can define a class that represents a user profile. I can call it whatever I like. It could be called user profile, even though the collection is called profile, so they're not linked. So actually, am I going to? Yeah, I think it's probably good. I was going to do a from docbridge import document, but I won't do that because it's just good to see where we're touching the library that I've been working on for the last 7 weeks or something. So I'm just going to leave this as a pass, but what I can, this takes, when you instantiate one of these, it has, and in fact, I can show you the code, I think. Apparently I can't show you the code. Oh, there we go. Document. It extends document. It has a constructor. It takes the actual underlying BSON document that I just showed you and that I pretty printed, and it takes reference to the database. I'm hoping to factor that out at some point. And actually, it doesn't take a strict parameter because I changed that to be a class level thing and not an instance level thing last week. So this doesn't do a lot. It just wraps a BSON dictionary, but it gives you a slightly nicer way of accessing the attributes. So let me instantiate one of those. There we go. And now I think I can print this, but I don't think it's gonna print it very well. That's maybe something that I might want to cover in later on in this live stream. So that's one of the sort of gaps that I've noticed. Oh, and I forgot to pass it the database. So let's just give it the database as a second parameter. Really don't like that. Really don't like objects, especially lots of objects holding onto a reference to their database. So that gives you a profile object. It's instantiated. It literally does nothing. So it's not deserializing the data. It's not transforming the data. It is just a wrapper around the data. And that's done on purpose because potentially you're dealing with lots of these objects. Potentially you're only dealing with a few of the objects, actually caring about them and only caring about a very small subset of the fields. And so I don't want the overhead of doing any kind of complicated transformation for all of the objects. So everything's done lazily and on demand. And one of those things is you can look things up by field name, by the name that they're defined in the document. So I can print profile.user ID. I think there's a username as well. And that prints out 4, right? If you remember, I looked up user ID 4, and that gives you a value. So instead of having to do if it was the BSON document, we had to look this up as user ID, which is just it's just got lots of nasty tokens either side. It's just a sort of a nice thing to deal with this as a class. But we can also define the field on it. So there's a docbridge field that does a lot of heavy lifting for us. So I can define user ID. You know what? I'm going to call it ID equals docbridge.field. If you've used Django or some of the other ODMs and ORMs, this should be relatively familiar to you. And I can say this takes field name is user ID. So now I can look it up as ID. So I've just sort of renamed it on the object. It's literally just looking up a field name, user ID, when I access the Python attribute name ID. So now if I run this, I should still get 4. So that's good. The problem is that the type of this is still a string, but you noticed it's a number, right? It's a numeric value. It's just stored as a string. So this is one of these cases where maybe your Python application actually wants this to be a number, because Python can deal with enormous numbers as integers, because it just transparently deals with ints turn into longs automatically when they cross a certain threshold. So one of the nice features of being a dynamic language, but this is a string, so it's not going to. I can't add numbers to it, things like that. Yeah, we've got an anonymous LinkedIn user here who has pointed out that my head covered the console output. Thank you for that. I genuinely appreciate you telling me that. I can fix that problem by moving my terminal over a little bit. Hopefully, I think am I on the left-hand side? Yes, I'm on the left-hand side. And I'll do something. Well, no, I'll just leave the file list here, and then that does the same job. Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. You know what? I'm going to move this up a little bit as well, because like having the text at the bottom of the screen isn't ideal either. So there we go. Hopefully that makes sense when I bring that up and hide it again. Cheers. Okay, so that all I showed you on the screen was that when I print out the type of the ID, it's a string, and I want it to be a number. And that's another thing that I can do with the field is I can give it a type. I actually stole that name from argparse. So type just takes a function that converts whatever the value is into whatever the type you want. And it's quite nice, a nice feature of Python that the int function, or int constructor if you prefer, can take a string and it just returns you an int object. So now if I print, well, I'm going to print the value and the ID. Print the value and the type. Print profile.id. So this is, it didn't like getting a type. Why did it not like getting a type? I'm pretty certain that's defined on here. Oh, I changed it to transform. I apologize. I think I've got a sequence field as well. And I think that takes a type. So there you go. There's an inconsistency. So it's called a transform at the moment. And now we get an int instead of. So that's a nice sort of very simple transformation. What gets really interesting is when you start getting into the more complex fields. So this is something I implemented a few weeks ago. Oops. Is a thing called a sequence field. I'm probably going to copy and paste this code in from somewhere else so you don't have to watch me write it, but I do want to show you what the data looks like. So I still have this in the terminal, hopefully. You notice this is a lot of data that is being printed out. There's lots of followers here, and that's an array of subdocuments in our BSON structure. Each one of these is a user profile that follows you. It's actually a subset of a user profile. So it's just like it's just the things you'd expect to see if you were looking at your followers page. So it's you may not see the user ID, but that would be part of a link. You'd probably see their name. And maybe you'd see just a very short summary like of their biography or whatever. There's a cool library called, I think this was Faker I used to generate these, and it just sort of generates these nonsense text things, which is quite cool. What you can't see from this structure is that there's a maximum of 20 items in this array. But actually, you might have more than 20 followers. Yeah, it might actually be popular. And so some of those, so if there are more, they don't get stored in this document. Although generally you store data that's accessed together, you store it together in the same document. In this case, we can't, because it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. You might end up with thousands or potentially even millions of followers. So you have to store those in a different collection. I've stored those in a collection called followers. So, and there's a query for looking them up. So let's just add my sequence field first. I'm gonna define a follower. Bridge. And this has, I mean, in fact, you know what? I'm not going to define any fields on there, so because I don't want to do any transformations or anything. So I'll just leave it as a dynamic document. Oh, not field, document. It's a document. So that's just going to encapsulate each individual follower, and then I can have followers here, and I can make this a sequence field. So this is going to be very simple to start with. I think, is this where type equals follower. So I'd basically just say, as I'm iterating through the contents of the followers field, just wrap each item, each subdocument with this follower, which is kind of similar to profile. So now if let's just loop through the followers. I'm going to do this after those. For follower in profile.followers, print follower. This is obviously not going to be very useful because you've seen the way that documents actually print out, but it will. And I'm just going to stick an indent there because that's always nice. And I got Pedro from Brazil. Hi, Pedro. Pedro is another colleague. Thank you for joining us. This is really cool. I will say, apart from a couple of people, everybody so far has been a lovely colleague of mine from MongoDB supporting me on this live stream. So I do appreciate that. Thank you. Let me run the program again. And there we go. Lots of follower objects. For each one of those, I can't actually remember the attributes of each. I keep doing this. What were the attributes? Follower. Let's print out the username. And that, again, we can just use .lookup to look them up. If you look up an attribute that doesn't exist on the document that's being wrapped, it just raises an attribute error like any other Python object. So here we go, lots of usernames. There we go. That's kind of cool. Already this is feeling more Pythonic than kind of traversing dictionaries and pulling out fields from dictionaries and things. But the really cool thing, I think, the really cool thing is when you get to the next bit, which is where we say, well, when we've run out of followers, I need you to go and get some more followers using this query. So I have a test that actually shows this. I wasn't expecting to spend so long writing this sample code, to be honest, but I feel like we've kind of highlighted a few of the flaws already in that it doesn't print very well. Unless you set a sequence field, you just get an array back, an array of subdocuments like BSON documents, and I want to manage that as well. I want automatic wrapping of like as you traverse through a document, I want everything to be wrapped. So we'll look at that today. I think we should get that done before the end of the session. So let me just find where I've. So we were looking at saving last week. I have a follower implemented somewhere. There we go. So if I add the collection where the other followers are, I can also add a query as a function. So in this case, it's a lambda and it's passed the profile, and then it just returns a query. So in this case, it's returning an aggregation pipeline. I'm not going to go into the details because I actually went through that in the last live stream, but I am just going to put that here. And now, if I print the number of the follower at the start, so we can enumerate the followers. So if you've used this before, enumerate yields both the index that you're currently on and the follower that you're currently looking at. So I can now go I and follower. Let's just call it index. Indexes are better. I don't like really short variables, I have to say. And then I can print. You know what? I'm going to switch to F strings because F strings are cool. And I'm going to print the index, a colon and a space, and then the follower's username. There we go. Oh, and a quote. And now, there we go. So now we've got nearly 60. Before it would have stopped at 20 because those were the ones that were embedded in the document. So we're hiding the pattern that we're implementing. So the subset pattern says that you only want to store a subset of your arrays. If you've got a very large array, we recommend at MongoDB that you only store up to 200 items in an array, because if you store more than 200 items, you start to get to the point where it takes a very long time for MongoDB to be able to read through your document, to skip through the items in there, to pull out other fields. And so it can make your whole document kind of reading slow. So you limit yourself to 200 items. If you've got a field that's ever going to have more than that, you need to start storing those in another collection. And that's what the subset pattern allows you to do. But normally that's not very nice to implement. Like normally you have to write that code in your application. You have to write like, okay, give me all the items in this array and then check to see if there's some more. And I've just hidden that away in this quite nice pattern. You know, I said before that I quite like the MongoDB query language, especially aggregation pipelines. I think they're quite cool. And so being able to just say, look, this is just a sequence. It's just called followers. You can set that name as a parameter if you want to. But you can also say just like, okay, but there may be some more. And this is how you get them. So I want to make this more extensible at some point. Like maybe you can chain these together. That's what it's actually using behind the scenes. If you're a Python developer, it's using its tools chain. But it would be quite nice to maybe say, well, we've got this collection with some of the followers and this other collection with some of the followers, if you ever had that pattern, and then we could just sort of hide that away. So these are some of the patterns, some of the things that I want to abstract so that your application just looks like this and it's not linked directly to your database structure. Right. Okay, I'm trying to think what we should work on first. I did have an idea of what I was going to start with, and I can't actually remember what it was. So, okay, that was it. Yes, so traversing unspecified fields. So we have, let's just get rid of that thing that I just implemented. Let's just pretend that followers is what I've been calling a dynamic field. Oops. There we go. So now, if I iterate through followers, will this work? I think this will work. Still, there you go. So it's each follower is actually a BSON dictionary now. So I can still print the username out, but it's basically, if I, to show you what the problem is, we still get index, but if I want to look up that username, I have to do follower square brackets username. And we can't do any sort of translation there. There's no power of this ODM. So what I want is this line to work, because I want follower to be a document, as in a document with a capital D. I want it to be one of these classes. So I need to look into my code that returns values. So the code that returns dynamic values from the wrapped document. And we can kind of make this recursive. So if you access a sub document, it will return you a document object. And then if you access something on that is a sub document from there, it returns you another wrapped document. So each time it's just kind of handing you back this helper object, which by default will be one of these empty dynamic documents, not a subclass. But if you specified it with a transform, I can specify this as saying this is a follower type, and then it will return a specific type of document in that case. But I want the defaults to be different. Right, so let's go in here. This is getting back into Python metaprogramming. If you're not used to that kind of thing, don't be afraid. I don't know whether it's really relatively straightforward. I've been giving talks on Python metaprogramming for a few years, but I will explain what's happening. So here's my document. This is just kind of an empty wrapper for an underlying BSON document that's stored as _doc. Python has this thing called, it has dynamic attribute lookup. So if you look up an attribute that doesn't actually exist, so in this case, if we're looking at our sample code, follower doesn't have a user ID, and yet we were able to access username. We were able to access username. Under the hood, what Python does, if you access an attribute that hasn't been defined on a class, is it calls this magic method. So every time you see an attribute or something that begins and ends with a double underscore, it's a reserved name. It's a magic name in Python, and it will do something special. And the only way you know what that is to go and look at the documentation to see what that specific name does. The getAtter function is a fallback that says if you're looking something up that doesn't exist, then call this method with the name of the attribute, and then it's up to this method to decide what could be returned. And if it's asked to return something that's nonsense, you can just raise an attribute error, and it will behave the same way as looking up any other attribute that doesn't really exist. So I've got some basic logic here. I've got this idea of strict documents that don't do dynamic lookup. You need to define all of those fields on it for them to be accessible. But in this case, these documents will be dynamic. So here so if somebody accesses doc, you actually return the document. There we go. So yeah, sorry. If it is dynamic here, then it looks up the attribute name in the document that's been wrapped, the BSON document. So that's really straightforward at the moment. That's just what's returning the value that's stored inside the MongoDB document. But I want to do a little bit more transformation on it. So I'm going to assign that to a variable called value. This is a bit of a generic name, but then we are traversing these sort of values. We don't know what they're going to be. So maybe a generic name is quite good. And then I'm going to check the type of that value. So the types that I care about are arrays and dicts. So a dict is subdocument. So let's just do that now. If is instance value dict, then I can just return document wrapping value. So there we go. I'm just wrapping that in a document, and I also need to pass it the DB value, which is stored as self._db. So let's, oops, and I'm going to put an else in here. This is my sort of fallback. I'm not implementing the array just yet because I think I need to do a little bit more before I do that. That's going to be a little bit more complicated. But here, if it's not a dict or an array, a list rather in Python, I'm just going to return the value. I have to say, doing a tutorial like this, working with MongoDB in Python, the terminology is there's so much of an overlap. So it's like they've got similar data models with sort of dictionaries that are so dicts in Python and documents in MongoDB, and then they have fields in MongoDB terminology and and items actually in Python terminology. And then you've got objects that we're using to wrap those documents, and those have attributes. Anyway, if I'm mixing up my terminology, I apologize a little bit. I'm trying my best to be as consistent as possible while moving between the different technologies. So I think, and here I went back to my, oh no, I didn't. This is the code that looks it up by as a dict. So let's go back to our field name. This is what didn't work before, and I'm hoping that this might just work now. Oh, it didn't. Dict. Yeah, so it's actually, interestingly, it's still returning a dict. So I've obviously made a mistake. I will point out that I'm going to turn this into a test. I normally work directly with tests, but today I just decided to sort of build a script that does some stuff because I thought it helps explain what's going on a little bit more. So yeah, I'm just going to print out the type of the value. Oh, yes. Okay. This is my own fault. So I'm looking up followers. Followers is a list. And so it's returning the list, and then it's just looping through. And that's a list of MongoDB documents, so BSON documents. So it never gets to look up an attribute on the list because it's just a Python list. So I actually need to implement the next thing for followers to work. Let's... I don't think I have any subdocuments in this data structure, which is kind of a shame. Yeah, no subdocuments here. They're all inside this array. So I'm going to have to, I can't do this in one step. I'm afraid I'm going to have to do it in two. So let's do the elif is instance list. So now we basically, is followers a list? Yes, it is. Well, I don't want to just return that list of dictionaries. I want to return a list of documents. And I can actually do that. Yeah, let's just do that as a list. So I can use a list comprehension to do exactly that. Start and end with the square brackets. And I can say document item for item in value. So what this will do is it will return a list where it's iterated through value, which is our list of followers. Each follower is then wrapped with a document. We're using this line, this part of the statement, and then it just sort of bundles that up and returns it as a list. If you haven't worked with sort of Python list comprehensions before. I'm always doing that, hitting the backslash. Okay, so it's still failing. And the reason is, yet again, that I forgot to put in the database. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, Anirudh, I recognize your name. You're a regular, aren't you? Thank you for coming back. Yep. That needs to be there. And a return. Yeah, exactly. There we go. I love it when people are really on top of the code. It's especially while I'm talking and writing at the same time. So let me get back to there we go. List followers. Whoa, recursion, maximum recursion. I hate that. Okay. I have a feeling we had some recursion problems the last time you were on the stream. Okay. let's have a look. I need to find out what line we're on. If not self._strict. That's a bit weird, actually. Main index follow.username class list. I'm printing the type of value. Oh, I will still want that in there, I think. Creating a new document. I really appreciate the effort you're putting in, Luce, trying to keep on top of the code. Yeah, this is not the easiest place to jump in to either Python or even this project, really. There's a whole load of magic going on here, and it's just, yeah, I'm kind of, the problem really is that I'm changing the way you look up items on objects, which is not uncommon in dynamic languages. It's very much something that you could do in even back in Perl days, but you can do it in fact, it's used a lot in Ruby. In Python, we tend to be a little bit more careful about how often it's used, but it is used a lot in ORMs like Django models and SQL Alchemy and things, and it's and the various ODMs that are available for MongoDB, and it's easy to hook into that attribute lookup thing and return a thing that then is doing a magic lookup thing, and so you end up kind of cascading down. And I'm not quite sure why that's happening here. Yes, I would very much love to have you on the live stream. We need to start talking about specific dates and get that scheduled in, won't we? Otherwise, this will never happen. We've said this before. Excellent. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a look. I've got 10 minutes left of the live stream, so let's see if we can solve this before the live stream's over. I am going to. So Anna has asked if iter is overloaded, and no, it isn't. I don't think I've implemented my own iterator anywhere in this library yet, and the problem seems to be here for some reason. I'm just going to take out this line, which we sort of know works, but I feel like that's maybe adding some extra so something extra that maybe we don't want. I have to admit, I don't like debugging like this, where I'm just not quite sure why. I'm still not quite sure why it's saying that if strict line is but if this should be a Boolean, so this should fall into this line. Let's just let's print the so if not self_strict. So self_strict. See, this is what I mean by recursion, right? So the _strict, this is actually an attribute lookup on myself. So this potentially goes through this to yeah, actually, I wonder if we are just falling foul of a bug in this code. Yeah, exactly. Like normally you would just look things up in the object. The object is a dictionary essentially behind the scenes. And in this case, we're going through into this item that we're wrapping. I feel like this really might be our problem, but I'm trying to think why it wouldn't just be returning value. So let's just, we've got the type of the value. Let's just print the name as well, so we can see sort of a little bit what's going on. So print so we're looking up followers. Yeah, this isn't the _strict thing. And that is defined. Like that wouldn't call getAtter, because it's defined on the class. It's, in fact, there we go. It's passed in as part of the class definition, and it's set to false by default. Unless we've got something weird going on there, and I don't know what it is. So we'll print the attribute and the type. We're looking up followers, and it's a list. So we're returning result equals print result. Let's just see what that is, and then return result. So try that again. So now, yeah, it's printing. Whoops, there we go. So we get a list of documents. And then I'm trying to print the follower's username. Why? But it's not looking up the username. It's never getting to that point where it's looking up the username, which is kind of weird. Well, let me, okay. I'm going to need an F at the start of this, but so looking up strict. So that is our problem. I have some weird logical problem with the dictionaries, with the documents rather. I wonder if we can't just, I wonder if we just can't use a plain document. Strict is only on the subclass which inherits document. Well, yeah, so that's just the conclusion that I've come to, Anirudh. But I don't know. Oh, it is in its subclass. So there we go. We never get a strict otherwise. Oh, this is so annoying. But there have been 2 occasions while I've been developing this library that I've sort of learned something or had something made clear to me that wasn't clear otherwise. Okay, so I can do what I did before, which is I just say documents by default are not strict. They are dynamic, and then this won't call getAtta on document itself. So there we go. I should maybe have just had a subclass of document called dynamic document or something like that. That would have solved this problem. I am going to put these lines back in because I think this is now going to work. Yeah, so we solved that together. That was really good. Okay, yes. So, sorry, if you didn't see that, I'm printing out the usernames, and each username is a string. And that is because I've still got a whole load of debug statements in here that I don't really want. So we've got 3 cases. We've got like the value is a dictionary, i.e. a subdocument. So I want to wrap that with our nice wrapper. I've got the value is another compound value. It's a list. So we return that as with every item. Oh no, this isn't going to work either, because this is just assuming that every item in the array is a document, whereas in fact it might just be an array of numbers. Yes, and it is in fact rubber duck programming. Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to need to do something a little bit more dynamic here, where I basically, for every item in the array, I decide what it is and return the correct value. That's not too difficult to do because it's essentially this logic here. And in fact, I can extract that into a wrap function. Whoa, let's put in the function definition first. I can make this a class method. I could even make this a static method. Oh no, I need self. So yeah, cool. Wrap value. So the idea is anything I pass to this will be wrapped. So if it's a dictionary, it will be wrapped by a document. If it's a list, it will recursively call wrap. I'm just setting myself up for more recursion problems here, aren't I? So here it will wrap the item. And I don't need to pass in self.db because it will do that automatically if it's a document. And then if it's a scalar value, like a number 4 or a string or something like that, it will just return the value. So here we go. And I can actually just, this is great. Like I love it when programming works like this, because I can take those lines of code and just remove them. And then this just becomes return wrap. And that's our value in there. So we can use it in both cases, right? We can, because it's a function or a method rather, we can use it recursively here. Let's see if that works. I've got 3 minutes left. So if it doesn't work, it's something to fix next time. There we go. That actually works. I don't have any test data to work with that, but I will write some before next week's session. And then next week we're going to be, although this was, I spent this time writing, well, really this block of code and making it work. We're going to be building a web-based API. I've already started it. I've done some read-only stuff there, but we're going to add in some of these higher level abstractions. We're going to start writing data to the database. And so we're going to be building something just a little bit more kind of real world like next week. So I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you very much for sticking with me. It's been as always, it's a bit of a roller coaster, right? I think it's fair to say I'm a very experienced Python developer, but there's always surprises going along. I have a friend who's just passed a boot camp, and she was saying she's got lots of friends who happen to be software developers, and she said she was looking forward to getting more advanced, or sort of more skilled as a developer, because then she was looking forward to programming not being quite so frustrating. And she did get laughed at in a very friendly and warm way, because it never stops being frustrating. It's just different types of frustration, different levels of frustration, but it's always a learning experience, and that's what I love about it. And Ekaterina, thank you for your lovely comments. Yeah, I like talking and coding, so yeah, if you enjoy hearing my thought processes, I'm going to be back next Wednesday. I'm glad you enjoyed this session. I hope you'll join us then. It's going to be 2 p.m. UTC next Wednesday, which is actually my normal slot. So I've been taking over somebody else's slot sort of later on a Thursday for the last 2 weeks, but I'm going to be going back to my normal time on a Wednesday. I usually post about it on LinkedIn, so you'll find my LinkedIn details in the description if you want to follow me. Yeah, I hope to see you all again. Thank you for coming. And I think we'll end there on a high, right, with everything working. Take care, everybody. See you next week.